In the movie Dangerous Minds, Michelle Pfeiffer's character is trying to get control over an urban school, and one of the pieces of advice that she got from one of the students in her classroom is that she needed to get Emilio, the leader, the Latin Fonzie-looking guy who's 30 years old, who looked like he was going to sexually assault her, is the student that Michelle Pfeiffer needed to win over in order to win over the classroom. And in that movie, which by the way, you should definitely watch, I'm sure it's available on whatever streaming service it's available on, she does win over Emilio, and thus she wins over the class.
Read it again, Miss Johnson.
What?
Read those lines you just read again.
I will not go down underground, because somebody tells me that death is coming round. Does that mean just what it says?
No, don't mean just what it says. Because you wouldn't go under the ground if someone told you death was coming. But you would go into the ground if you were already dead.
And thus, this urban violent school, at least for this classroom, turns into an absolutely lovely experience, a heartwarming tale, and it's probably based on a true story. But unfortunately, life is not like the movies. Life is actually way more similar to a Netflix series in that it typically starts off promising, but then somewhere at the halfway mark of season 1, they try to drop that plot twist that is supposed to blow your mind, but in reality, it just sets up the show for its inevitable downfall. And then, when you're ready for it to all be over, you find out there's another season, and thus the nightmare must go on in perpetuity. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The nightmare that is the Clark County's public school systems, because they just had a school board meeting where they discussed some of the violent instances that have become normalized in Las Vegas public schools. And it's just ridiculous what people are willing to accept. And unfortunately, there is no older than Michelle Pfeiffer, 30-year-old Latin dude dressed like Fonzie that we can get over to our side in order to solve this problem. But before we get into the story, we have a sponsor. So let me toss it to the sponsor, but you're going to want to come back over here on the other side so we can go over this tale. The internet is becoming more and more of a necessity each and every day. You didn't need me to tell you that, but guess what? I just did. And one of the biggest problems with the internet with Wi-Fi signals is that it doesn't go everywhere it needs to go in your house. Even in my small New York City apartment, I find myself with dead spots. This is why I'm always looking at new extenders, new boosters, things to make my signal work better. And I try not to get it from my cable company because greedy ISPs charge you money to rent you equipment in order to make sure your stuff works properly. And it's one of the reasons why I'm super happy to be partnering with boostthewifi.com, which is this nifty small device that will extend and boost your Wi-Fi signal to reach those dead spots. Don't overspend on equipment from your internet company. Go to boostthewifi.com, get yourself one of these devices, and enjoy the internet that you're paying for.
Well, today, the Clark County School District Board of Trustees held its first board meeting since its new members were sworn in.
One teacher used that opportunity to speak on how staff are leaving due to an increase of behavior issues among students.
So the setup for this story is that you have a new school board being sworn in Clark County, which is the largest county in the state of Nevada that contains Las Vegas, which has some of the more problematic schools. Now, it's talked about in terms of behavioral issues, and I guess that is fair since some of these issues do start off pretty early on in the child's development. We're talking kindergarten through elementary school. However, the violence are criminal issues, and I think that needs to be emphasized because the solutions brought forward by many of the parents at these meetings and many of the teachers are just not adequate to address the problem.
At my school, we have one counselor for over 700 students. He does absolutely amazing work, but one is just not enough.
Vicky Criedel teaches reading to elementary students. She says behavioral issues have increased since the pandemic and it's impacting student achievement.
So look, I'm not somebody who wants to overload the schools with counselors and support staff and all of these positions that are honestly just created in order to have jobs in the public schools, often are filled with unqualified, sometimes dangerous people that should be nowhere near a classroom, but one counselor for 700 students is clearly and obviously not enough, and we can understand after these kids were being held out of school for a prolonged period of time, totally unnecessarily during the course of the pandemic, how there could be a lot of issues, especially at the elementary school level, with these kids and their mental health. So right here, I'm actually going to agree with the reading teacher to a certain extent that they do need some more support staff, at least in the school that she's talking about. But this story is about to take a completely different twist, a completely different turn, and we're going to talk about a problem that is so insanely different in scale from what she just mentioned that it honestly should shock the consciousness. But the thing is, we have school districts like this all over the country, and it's just the normal that a lot of parents and teachers and students have to live with.
Many educators are telling me they don't feel safe at work. There have been several high-profile incidents of violence and many others that are kept quiet.
Now, when this teacher, and again, credit to her for coming up and speaking out publicly during this public comment section, says that there's many instances of high-profile violence in Vegas schools, she is not joking. She is not misspeaking. She is not exaggerating. In fact, this is a problem that apparently has been going on for years, and people have been speaking up about it, and hopefully the newly elected Clark County School Board was elected with a new discipline policy in mind, because I can find stories going back years of these issues being brought up, and obviously they haven't been addressed if we're still talking about them right now. I gotta pull up this article, leave the local news segment for a little bit of time, just to give you some ridiculous examples that have happened over the past year. So in this article, which again is from April of last year, students, teachers, and people from the community all gathered outside of the school after a particularly horrific incident that took place on April 7th. During this incident, a 16-year-old student was arrested at El Dorado High School on charges of sexual assault and attempted murder, again, in the school against a teacher. Now, according to this article, which breaks down the story, the student in question, who we will call Emilio, went into a classroom to talk to his teacher. Again, we will be calling her Michelle Pfeiffer, just to keep the Dangerous Minds vibe up. And he wanted to talk to her about his grades because he wasn't doing well in school, presumably, and he was hoping to get some kind of sympathy or empathy from the teacher. Now, the teacher, who likely was taking her cues from Dangerous Minds, thought, well, even though this is a bad kid, even though this is a violent kid, if I just get him to participate in the class, maybe that will turn this whole school around. But in reality, that is not what happened. In reality, the student decided that this was an appropriate time to punch his teacher in the face repeatedly, then start strangling her, then when she was unconscious, sexually assault her. Also, to cap everything off, Emilio decided that it would be a good idea to then rob his teacher. So he decided not only to choose violence, but to commit each and every crime he could possibly think of in that moment, including strangling her to the point where he thought she was dead, even though fortunately she was just unconscious. This is the kind of thing that goes on in Clark County schools. This is the kind of thing that sparked outrage last year, that actually was the thing that got people up and animated, demanding change. And yet, at the beginning of 2023, we're having a school board meeting discussing the same violent issues, discussing very similar violent instances, and these are not just instances against teachers, but they're also the instances against the children. Remember, when it happens to a teacher, typically a teacher will report that, so it gets some kind of attention. When your kid gets beaten unconscious in a Clark County school, sometimes your kid is too embarrassed to tell anybody about it. Sometimes it's never investigated. Sometimes they are scared into silence by the potential gang members that we just let run rampant across Clark County public schools.
On Wednesday, a student at Sandy Valley High School was arrested after threatening a staff member, according to the principal. Last month, 2 Legacy High School staff members were injured trying to break up a fight that led to the arrest of 3 juveniles.
So that's Wednesday, as in January 11th, a week ago from the time that I'm filming this video. A student was arrested for threatening a staff member. Then, a couple months before that, we have an incident where there was a fight in the school, and then staffers try to break this up, but 2 of those staffers ended up being injured due to the violent nature of that fight. but it gets much worse.
We've previously reported on another assault at Legacy back in February when a student attacked the school secretary. In April of last year, 3 schools, Foothill High School, Grant Sawyer Middle School, and Palo Verde High School, had incidents of violence by students against teachers.
So you have a staffer, again, even this local news report acknowledges that this goes back to last year, that was attacked, and then they go to April of last year, which is the exact same time of the year that the incident that I'm talking about occurred, where the student decided to beat and sexually assault and strangle his teacher. Well, guess what? There's more instances like that from the very same month.
And also that same month, a teacher at El Dorado High School was found unconscious in a classroom after a student allegedly assaulted her.
Now you'll notice that this local news segment concluded with the story of a teacher being found unconscious, allegedly being attacked by a student at El Dorado High School, is the same exact story that I told you about, where the student did in fact beat this woman, strangle her, sexually assault her, and rob her. Funny how the local news completely downplays that to a teacher found unconscious. Maybe she just passed out randomly and people thought it was a student or something like that. It's not like there's an arrest record and there's all this paper trail and she's talked about it and this sparked outrage last year. Don't worry about that. Forget about that. We're just going to ignore that. And we're not going to give you a deep dive into any of the other 3 instances of serious violence against teachers that occurred in the same month that led to the dramatic walkout of students, teachers, staffers, and people in the community who are sick and tired of these violent kids completely going unchecked.
Safety concerns regarding student behaviors fall high on the list of why people leave and are leaving. We must address these concerns or we will lose even more.
So the teacher says it true right there that if you don't address these issues, if the schools become so dangerous that the teachers have to worry about them getting seriously injured, sexually assaulted, or even killed by the students, then obviously you're going to have them go into early retirement or just try to get a job at a different school district, one that has more sensible disciplinary policies. But if you thought that maybe this would shock the consciousness, maybe the Clark County School Board would go in the right direction, then you're wrong, because the way that this local news segment ends up wrapping this whole thing up really goes to show you that they have no grasp on the problem that they're dealing with in their school system.
The district is taking steps to address the mental health problem, and that includes partnering with Nevada State College.
Look, mental health is important. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. I want young people to have the services available to them as they need it, but here's the thing. This being described as a mental health problem is objectively nonsensical. What you're dealing with is a problem of criminality in the K-12 schools, and this exact attitude of trying to obfuscate that reality and blame it on something else, something that also happens to be no fault of the kids on their own because they're just mentally ill, they're just going through some anxiety, is what is leading us to this situation where nothing is going to get done. You have a security problem in the Clark County public school systems, and you have a disciplinary problem. It is no coincidence that when the Biden administration comes back into power and they reinstitute this equity in suspensions policies, which looks at schools and can charge them with discrimination based on the fact that they're disproportionately suspending certain demographics, all because of paranoia about the school to prison pipeline, that we see violence returning. The fact is, and I've gone over it time and time again on this channel, Black people commit more crime. Your peak offending years in terms of any demographic are males aged 14 to 25. This idea that we would not also see disproportionate suspensions for Black people or other groups that commit more crime than the national average as compared to white people or Asian students is absurd. This idea that they are well behaved and just act the same as everybody else in our K-12 system, but as soon as they leave that K-12 school, as soon as they get off the campus, that's when they start committing crimes, makes no sense. But if you have a policy like the equity and suspension policy coming from the Board of Education that punishes schools for actually implementing punishment based on behavior because they don't like the outcome in terms of the disproportionality of that behavior, you're going to end up with lesser and lesser consequences, and that's going to lead to more and more escalations of violence. If you're able to cut off violence at the first strike, when people are first offending, give it some consequences immediately, then you won't see this escalate. What ends up happening is you let this go, you let that go, and these kids build up animosity towards each other, and they continually escalate their behavior because you've basically decided that they need to work it out on their own. And now it's gotten so crazy that you're in situations where teachers are just being attacked, where now you're talking about arrests, but only after these dramatic instances where there's serious violence and people nearly die. Again, a female teacher was assaulted in her classroom, punched in the face repeatedly, choked until she was unconscious, and robbed, and that was a local news story. That was like, oh wow, I guess this happened, and it only got covered initially after other students and other staff members were so outraged by it that they decided to do a walkout. So the story was actually the walkout, and the ancillary information, the footnote to that story, was the vicious crime that went on in Clark County schools. We cannot tolerate this. We cannot pretend that this is normal. We cannot only acknowledge it when other people are pointing it out. When we see it, we need to react. When we see it, we need to demand change, and it doesn't look like the school board is going to go anywhere in the right direction. Again, they're saying it's a mental health problem, that it's not the fault of the kids. We need to show disdain for the criminals, blame them, give them the accountability that they deserve, and blame the parents for the crappy job that they're doing, and not try to play racial politics, not try to be progressive, not try to be politically correct, and not shift responsibility and pretend that a bunch of counselors are going to solve this. You know what's going to happen to these counselors? They're going to get their skull cracked just as easily as the teachers are getting it. If some kid in high school stabs another student over a drug deal gone wrong, I don't think the first thing we need to do is call a counselor to determine whether or not that knife-wielding maniac actually has some form of anxiety, actually might have OCD, and the thing that he was really stabbing at was the unevenness of the buttons on the drug-dealing kid's shirt who screwed him over, or the fact that he gave him a $20 bill that was slightly folded in the corner, and thus it wasn't perfectly rectangular. That's not going to solve anybody's problems. Newsflash, that's only going to make things worse, because while you're distracted with that, while you're denying reality, reality prevails. But hey, those are just my thoughts, and if you disagree with me, let me know your wrong opinions down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about the violence in Clark County Public Schools. Till next time.